Today's video is going to be about drawing white onto a black surface, and in this case we're going to be working with scratchboard. So here's some great examples of different scratchboard projects. You can see they have these really great crisp white lines on these really rich dark black backgrounds. Say that 10 times fast. You can get excellent contour line drawings going, like with the sphere and with the apple down here at the bottom. You can also get these great textures going with the rabbit and the bird down here that can help enhance your artwork. The first step, because we're going to be drawing our hands, is to practice drawing your hands. We want to work on getting proportion right so that your thumb isn't giant and you have an itty bitty palm, or you don't have a pinky that's larger than your pointer finger, because that's not how that works. So you'll practice it several times, work on getting your skill better, your proportion better, and then you'll pick one pose that you like the best. With that pose, you are going to photograph your artwork. We want to use photograph your hand in that position. We want to use harsh lighting so it really stands out, because the great thing about scratchboard is you can get these really high contrast images with the white versus the black. So it works best if you have a really bright light source on your hands. You can get these really rich shadows and really bright highlights. Once you have your hand in the pose and we've printed out the picture, the next step is to actually draw out, because we're not just going to copy, we're going to actually draw it out.
Okay, so now that we have our black and white version of our hand, we need to start drawing it, because we're not just tracing, we're better than that. And we're going to start by doing basic shapes, because it's a little intimidating trying to get all the details all at once. So if I'm looking at my picture over here and I want these two right next to each other, this shape right here is kind of generally a square, so I'm going to draw it as a square. It doesn't matter how light or dark I make these lines. I could have pale little lines, I could have nice big dark lines. This is just an underdrawing, so we will cover over this. It will never be seen in your final artwork. If this is the size of my palm, I know that my middle finger is going to be approximately the same length. However, this time my middle finger is curved a little bit, so it's going to be a little bit shorter. I can use this original picture and measure with my hand and say, okay, it's just that little bit less than this, so this finger should go just a little bit less than up here. I can also tell that this guy is coming out on an angle going this way, so I can start that hand there. There is a sizable gap between those two, so I'm going to leave some space there. If we look at the base of my thumb here, this is a nice oval. I think I made it too small, so I can just draw it a little bit larger. Then I'm going to stack those cylinders for my thumb on top of each other. I know that my thumb stops about 1/3 of the way down my middle finger. So if this middle finger is just slightly lower than, or this pointer finger is slightly lower than my middle finger, the thumb needs to be just slightly lower than that, going out. It's like a almost straight line. It's a little bit of raise in the middle. So then I can say I have my pieces here, my thumb shape, just general, doesn't have to be perfect. And then when I do these fingers, now these fingers everybody panics about because they're foreshortened and they're curled over. Just draw what you see. So I can tell that my middle finger comes out at an angle like this. So I actually need to move this over here some more. And that's like a block. This is like a block. Going something like that. This one, I know it's going to start down here, so I can start them. Like this is my pinky. But when I look here, this is more of a triangle shape. So I make a triangle. Okay, now I go back to more of that rectangle. And this part here is a rectangle, but it's curved at the end. This one over here, I can see that it is about half of this length is where the bottom of this guy starts. So about here, I know that the knuckle is about half of this height if I were to go across here. So about here. And then there's a little rounded piece back here. And if I start filling those in, I can start adding basics of where nails would be, fingernails. I can add wrinkles where those should be. And all of a sudden my hand starts showing itself. I can start making these a little bit curvier lines, making them look a little bit more natural, making them look more like what I actually see on my hand. And this goes off here and becomes my shirt sleeve, which, yes, I do need to draw that I'm wearing a shirt sleeve. I can simplify it for right now. Make sure you add nails any place you're supposed to have nails. Pay attention to the relative widths of things. There's a nice little bell for the end of the period. There's a little tiny nail showing right up there. And it should look something a little bit like this. Now all I have to do, because I have this underdrawing in place, is decide with a darker pencil. You can use a Sharpie, you can use a regular pencil, whatever you want to use. Go over and decide, okay, some of these lines I want to make sure that I keep. And some of them, I don't need that line in there anymore, but I do need a little bit of this line right here. And I do need a little bit of this line coming across here. And there's another one right here. Okay, and so now when I go to trace this onto my final copy paper, I no longer have to trace where my red lines are. I am just going to trace where the black lines are.
Now that you have your drawing done for your hand, the next step is to transfer it onto the piece of scratchboard.
Okay, so now in order to transfer it onto our scratchboard paper, all you need to do is take the back of your piece of paper, shade behind where all of your lines are,
The fifth step is then to practice using the actual tools. Before we start scratching into anything on our final copy, we want to actually practice so we don't make mistakes. You can see from this picture on here, there's a lot of different textures and patterns and rhythms you can make with the tools, and it's important to be comfortable with them before you actually start going on your final copy. But then of course it's time to actually start your final copy. So now that you have your image, you're going to start beginning to draw onto the hand. You're going to start with the lightest areas, avoiding all the dark areas, and then adding midtones in.
Okay, so in order to start scratching away and revealing some of the light parts of our scratchboard, we need to use our scratchboard tools. There are two different types of blades. One of them is more rounded, one is a straighter blade. The rounder edge, I can show you on a piece of scrap, is going to give you a much wider and brighter mark. The straight one is going to give you a much thinner and lighter mark. You can use both of these, one of these at a time, however you need. I'm going to start with the thinner line so that if I make mistakes, they're not as devastating. You want to keep your reference photo right next to your picture so you know the areas that you need to be working on. You want to start first with the very lightest areas of your picture. If I look at mine, I can see my nails tend to be the very lightest with these shiny highlights reflecting back at me. So I'm going to start by scratching in those light areas as opposed to the dark areas. We want to avoid the dark areas. And the very last step is to take your finished drawing and start adding patterns and centangles and designs into the background. There's a whole world of designs that you can choose. You just have to pick some.